special board meeting for the Saugerties Central School District. Designation of emergency exits, so one on the rear of the room, and then one on the left and the right. Jean, get 2 roll call, please.
Sure. Lee Paul.
Here.
Steve Rosa. Here. Katie Hall. Keita Irizarry. Carol Keller. Here. Michael Meyer. Jeffrey Ozzie.
Here.
Timothy Wells.
Here. Stand for the pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Dr. Rishik, our mission and vision statement.
Right. So here at Saugerties, we provide equitable, engaging, inspiring, and holistic experiences that support success and empowerment for students, families, and the community in a diverse and changing world. And our vision is to become a beacon of educational excellence where every individual is inspired to be able to reach their fullest potential.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to this is this meeting is called for the purpose of school budget and financial information. At this time, public recognition, so if there's anybody in the audience that would like to speak, now's the time. Okay. Without further ado, presentation. Dr. Richard Sims, welcome.
Thank you. Is this?
Yeah, you can pick it up and walk at it.
1, 2.
Okay. Okay, I'll ask you to do this. It's pretty comprehensive. We've done a lot of work since last. Completed the classes right now. The program is global use. Pretty involved.
I know the last time it was quite a bit to digest. There'll be a lot more this time.
So
So what we'll do is we'll walk through it.
Somebody started. They said they would start it. You gotta start the slideshow. I think we got it. Perfect. There we go. Well, thank you very much. We've got a lot of work done here. We're going to try and take you through kind of a little bit of the background of the district's finances, what we're seeing going forward so far as you build your current budget into next year's budget. And we're going to tell you a little bit about some things that we would recommend that you start thinking about. So, as I did last time, in the interest of time, this is the same list I gave you last time of all the things we would go over, and we've gone over every one of these exhaustively. So I'd like to also thank Dan and Michelle, who I don't see Michelle here, but giving us a lot of time and effort to dig through all the records of the school district. But let's take a look at reserves first. So I'm going to bring some pop-ups so we can talk about pieces at a time in these slides. So these are your current reserves. And we went over them last time a little bit. I talked to you about every single one of your reserves. And I think my major part is that
I think your unemployment insurance reserve is fine. You don't need a workers' compensation reserve at this point. You got a ERS and TRS, very adequately funded, so there.
Now you got
property, liability, insurance reserve, and liability paid off. Gate claim, going all right? Keep going.
You're just trying to match
The slides up there.
Still going out?
Still going out? Yeah.
We keep going?
We keep going? So that's fine. Talk about Eplar. One of the things I would do with Eplar is not put any more money in it for the rest of your life.
I'll tell you
Why.
why.
Eplar is really a very, very difficult
one to handle. It's general
General municipal law 6P,
Misuse of
the fund results and all those people associated with it, charging the misdemeanor.
We want to
We want to avoid that.
So the
So the whole idea here is this is only for use for studying the sick person on vacation days on severance from the district. That's the employee's benefit liability.
reserve,
Right in the middle. Okay.
The next one
is, I've got a whole list of capital reserves.
Now, you do have
a pretty significant capital reserve for capital construction, which is a 10-year reserve, starts in 2023 for $10 million.
Now,
keep in mind, let's just review how that works.
when you start
When you start a capital reserve,
each time
you do it, you have to have voter approval.
And in the
And in the voter approval, all
the proposition
proposition must have four parts.
The first part
First part is the purpose of the reserve.
So if you
notice down the page, below that, I've got different purposes of different types of capital reserves.
You can have
You can have capital reserves for equipment,
for vehicles,
for
for buses,
buses,
right?
right?
You could have
You could have them for classroom furniture,
for
and for
technology.
technology.
You can even
You can even combine
equipment and
equipment and
technology.
technology.
You
You
can
have
have
vehicles and buses.
So you can
So you can start reserves for many things.
The second
Second thing in the proposition is how long the reserve will last.
5 years.
5 years.
15 years. Now, the reason to do that, because it's evidence of long-range planning. That's what we're talking about. Instead of building an annual budget only, start looking ahead and taking a look at possible costs going forward. And then you could actually see basically where you want to go, how much money you want to save, and why you want to save it. After you figure out the period of time, you should also figure out how much the reserve will be for. In other words, what's the sum total of all the deposits that can be made into the reserve during the life of the reserve? Now, how do you get the length of time and the amount figured out? Easy. If it's, we'll say for instance, it was equipment replacement reserve, I would say to you, if you were thinking of 5 or 10 years, why don't you add up all the equipment that you've got to buy in the next 5, 10 years, that's your amount, that's your date. So what happens is, I think most school districts, they simply all of a sudden discover that they need to buy a new lawnmower. They discover they need to buy a new truck. Well, we don't want to discover anything. Long-range planning is thinking about it ahead of time. Now, the problem we have when we discover these things is they really hurt the budget. For instance, 5, 6 years ago, you could pick up a pickup truck, $30,000, $40,000 state contract. I bought 3 in the last couple of months for $75,000 to $85,000 each. So they're getting expensive. Same thing with dump trucks, snowplow equipment, lawn equipment, equipment for turf fields, equipment for sidewalks, snow blowers, all the big tractor items, they're getting very, very expensive. So what you'd want to do is like plan this out, how much you want to buy. So now we've got purpose, classroom furniture, let me not forget that. Many times the school district will do a capital project, and during it, they'll buy classroom furniture, like maybe these tables. I would never buy tables, chairs, desks, cafeteria tables in a capital project because they are non-aid eligible. You're going to buy the tables for 15 years plus interest. You could save up the money in a separate reserve and during the capital project buy the tables cash and save 15 years worth of interest on the tables. It all adds up. So the idea here is to think ahead. That's what we talk about long-range planning. The other thing too is the fourth part has got to be, where's the money coming from? The money comes from a number of places. 1, fund balance. If you exceed the 4% limit, you do. If you would have a voter-approved capital reserve this coming May, you could simply, the next board meeting, transfer that money right into the reserve. It can come from state aid. For instance, you were getting state aid on a capital project. You can dump some of that money into the reserve. And another place I think you can get it from is accrued interest. So what happens here now, school districts have money in high interest bearing accounts, so you can get a good chunk of interest on this. If you put a good chunk of money in a capital reserve, it can accrue interest and build up. So let's just say you start at a $10 million 10-year reserve. Could you ever have more than $10 million in it? The answer is yes, as long as you did not transfer it in there. It only came in through interest earnings above the $10 million. Okay? Now, you do not have to put the money in all at once. If it's a 10-year reserve, you got 10 years only, not only to fund it, but to use it. So you could put 5 million in, and then decide to do a capital project and use 3 of it, leaving 2 in. But then you'd have more time to put more money in until you got to 10 million. So it doesn't have to be deposited all at once. It's a long-range plan on what you want to do. Same thing with capital projects. You had a building condition survey, correct? Right, all about your buildings. So it tells you basically what needs to be repaired. So the question I would have is, okay, so when are you going to do this? What's your priorities? What are the lists? Okay, no, I'm not your financial advisor. I'm just doing this project. But if I was, I'd be asking that like right now, because I'd want to plan ahead. Because if you have a capital reserve, that money is a down payment against the capital project. So if you did a $20 million project and you had $5 million in capital reserve, you only have to borrow 15, but you're going to get aid on the entire $20 million project as long as it is aidable. So there's a number of ways to look at all this. So there's a lot going on with reserves that you should really consider long term. Now, to spend the money, you also have to have voter approval. Now, to me, it's not, everybody, a lot of board members go, wow, gee, voter approval to start, it's a lot of work, voter approval is spent it. But I think that's the glory of it. The glory of it is you keep faith with the public. You're not only asking them, can I save it? You're telling them what it's for, how you can save it, how you're going to get the money, and how you want to spend it. And then you can justify how to spend it. So to me, it's perfect transparency and really keeping in tune with the public, the voters, the residents. So that's certainly important, those types of reserves. Now there's also a reserve for repair which you are not eligible for, but hypothetically a lot of districts are. Let's just say you had multiple school buildings, and because of declining enrollment you decided to collapse the buildings into a smaller number. So now you have an empty building. What do you do with the building? In many cases you sell it. A lot of people make condos out of them, apartments, all kinds of things. So what happens then? Well, if you owe money on that building, you take the proceeds from the sale, in other words, how much you got for the sale of the building, you put it in that reserve, and you use it over time to absolve yourself of the debt, because you still owe money on the building. So it makes sense. Then there's another one there, the reserve for debt, or that's basically what that could be used. Your repair reserve, by the way, isn't very good. You don't have one, and if you keep up on capital projects, you shouldn't need a big one. I tell districts, if you put 20 to 50,000 in, it's more than enough. Repairs are non-aidable. So if the roof up here is leaking and you repair it, you cannot get state support. But if you replace it during a capital project, they will help you pay for it. So there's a difference. You got to think ahead. So what's the life of this roof? That's what you start thinking about. And the idea is to get a schedule of roof replacements for all the buildings, so that you don't want to replace all the roofs at once, because whoever succeeds you, when we're all, pushing up daisies, probably 25 years from now, somebody's going to have to replace all the roofs again at once. It'll cost a fortune. So the idea is plan ahead, do everything in increments, and that's what I'd suggest. Now, as we look, we've got a nice total here. Now, here's what I like about these reserves. If you notice, we started at 1.589 million, and at the end of this little piece I'm showing you now is 12.6. So somebody had their thinking cap on in the district, which kudos to the district. You have had, over the last 3 years, we'll say 21 to 24, huge amounts of federal funds available, and that's the time to build fund balances and build up those reserves, and you have. But there's something else you have. You actually have more cash than it's in reserves. If you notice the section I'm showing right down here, we've got the numbers in red over on the right, 1.772 million. You're in violation of real property tax law 1318. If the controller comes in, he's going to want you to return that money from whence you got it. And that would not be helpful for your finances at all. That money should probably be up on top in those reserves someplace. So you do have money that you can access pretty quickly to start any one of those capital reserves or further fund any of the other reserves you want. But that money's supposed to be up on top in those reserves. You're only allowed to keep 4% of the next year's budget. And you can see you're over by 1.772. Okay? Now, I must tell you that you're not the only district that's in this little predicament. The controller will not like it, but I see an opportunity. To me, I think you could remedy this situation probably by June 30th. Okay? If you work hard. The next thing is capital project long-term planning, as I mentioned, and vehicle purchase and technology. There's nothing in there that tells me that you've done any long-range planning. I think you're doing budgets year to year, just hoping for the best as you go, which is okay too, but it really isn't as safe as it could be. None of this is going to get less expensive. Capital projects are escalating rapidly. The price of labor, I don't think people understand the economics of inflation with regard to capital improvements. Maybe the price of eggs may come down once avian flu's gone, perhaps, but I don't think the price of construction's gone down at all. Because the trend is once they get a higher price, it stays up there. Has anybody ever seen one of the big car makers all of a sudden reduce all their prices back to like a previous year? It just doesn't happen. So that's going to be the same with capital projects. The other thing too is your capital project in this reserve section is 37% of all the reserves, which is another reason to take that money that's above the 4% and move it to the top. But don't just move it anywhere, come up with a plan, okay? Come up with a plan on what you want to do. Now, if we look going forward, when I was here last time, basically it was under my understanding at the time that your budget was going to use some ERS and TRS to balance your budget in the current school year. That will not be needed. So if you notice, I've got all those reserves trending forward without any decreases in there at all. I think we penny pinched our way toward the end of this year, and I think we're going to be in good shape. But the key thing is you will not have to make those transfers. And believe me, when I saw that you were going to make those transfers, I really was very unhappy because you really want to avoid that. You only want to make those transfers when it's absolutely necessary for the survival of the district. That's your rainy day fund. And it better be raining when you use it. That's the whole idea. Make sense? Okay. So that is no longer going to be used, and that's no longer going to be used, so that is good news. You'll have other funds. Remember that the budget is in what they call the general fund. Your UPK money goes into the special aid fund. The people, when you eat lunch and breakfast and all that goes into the school lunch fund. Okay? And you have a school lunch fund here, and it's doing very, very well. It's at the bottom of the page, and it's supposed to be like that. But sooner or later, you will get a letter from the State Education Department Nutrition Division telling you have excess fund balance, and you're going to need that to use that money somewhere in your nutrition cafeteria school lunch program. So that is, if it hasn't arrived yet, it will be coming. So just keep that in mind because they don't want you to have big fund balances there. All right, the next thing is your debt service fund is in green. Now the debt service fund is a handy fund, but there's something weird going on with your debt service fund. If you'll notice, underneath it there's blue numbers, which means it's going up. A debt service fund by definition is always supposed to go down. Okay, so a debt service fund, where's that money come from? Well, I'm not sure where yours came from, but here's how they usually come from. A debt service fund money comes from a couple places. One, let's just say you did a $10 million project. You borrowed the whole $10 million, but you only spent $9.5 million on the project. So now you have $500,000 in borrowed money. You cannot give it back once you borrow it in a bond. You cannot give it back. So you put it into that little fund, and then you use it to absolve yourself of debt for that capital project each year. 3 to 5 years, some people stretch it out a little longer. The controller likes 3 to 5 years. So that's how money gets in there. The second way it gets in there, let's just say you were bidding on a capital project. And I said, okay, so I'm your financial advisor. I said, listen, we've got 4 bids, and they're exactly the same. They're all exactly 4% period. For this right period of time, the right amount of money, everything. Except one person said this. Yeah, mine's 4% like everybody else's, but read the fine print in mine. It says, I will give you a premium of $30,000 if you accept my bid. In English, that means this. You can take, you accept my bid, and I will actually hand you a check for $30,000. That makes my bid better than everybody else's. Because now, the net interest cost is now lower, because you're going to take that $30,000 and use it in your first payment. So therefore, the cost of the district would be lower, making them the winning bidder. That money, that $30,000, would go into that debt service fund and be used to offset debt over the next 2 to 3 years. It's called a premium. There's a third way it gets in there. A third way it gets in there is accrued interest, because all these money in your district should all be in high interest bearing accounts, which it is, by the way, and it should be prorated interest to all the funds, right, and all the reserves, so it can accrue interest. There's a fourth way it gets in there, by mistake. Somebody puts money in there and they're not supposed to. Most of the time your auditors catch you. I see no evidence that was ever done at all. But the key thing is it's supposed to be used every year. The plus about it being used every year is it helps decrease your debt service. In other words, your debt. Makes sense, right? The bad news is it actually depletes your tax cap. And we're going to do a little talk on a tax cap today. The last thing you want to do is actually have your tax cap depressed if you can help it. I know you're all board members and don't want to tax any more than you have to, but we're going to talk about that before I leave, and we're going to talk about how that works, because the tax cap is trickier than it looks. So let's just save that conversation for a little later. Okay, next, let's talk about state aid. I went over the state aid last time I was here, but let's just kind of do it again for a quick refresher, because there's a lot on the page. The first one I want to go over, and I'm only going to do half of it at a time, because we're going to look at things in pieces, okay? Like where we are versus where we're going. I think that's the way we got to look at everything. So the first one's foundation aid. And if you'll notice, in the 23-24 school year, you got 17,432. You'll see it's right up there on top, which was an $876,000 increase, or 5.3% increase in your foundation aid. You waited 17 years to get that money. I don't know if you're aware of this, but the state has not paid in full. You notice it says on there, full. Did not pay a district its full amount for 17 years. I know, because I've been arguing with the legislature for 17 years. So the thing is that you finally got paid. Now, I don't want you to think you got fully paid. It says paid in full, but you were paid in full for just that year. The prior 16 years you weren't paid in full, you're still not paid in full. So I borrow $100 from you and promise to pay you $10 a week. At the end of the 10th week, I hand you $10, I say, we're good. That's how it worked. And where'd the money come from to pay all these districts off? Federal money. Remember, COVID money flew into the states. They used it to do this. And that's because organizations, I'm also executive director of statewide school finance consortium, we were suing the governor. So what happens is, if we dropped our suits, she would pay everybody. So we dropped our suits. Okay? So she paid. So you got that big bump there. The next part, I think, you got high tax aid, $342,000. I wouldn't want anybody to think here you are eligible for high tax aid in any way. Yes, we have high taxes, that's why we get it. That is not true. That aid was created 15 years ago. That aid was created 15 years ago, and when it was created, what they found out was it wasn't distributed equitably. So what the legislature did is, rather than take it back from anyone, they simply kept the same amount for 15 years. So if you were to go back in your books 15 years ago, you would see that exact same amount there. They have not recalculated it for any district in the state of New York, because they don't want to have to take money away, just in case you're no longer eligible. But you get it, so that's good, okay? Then the next group are what they call expense-driven aid. So it's transportation, building, BOCES, public and private excess cost aid. So let's start with transportation. Transportation aid always vacillates, as do all the rest of them, by the way. They vacillate sometimes a lot, sometimes a little. What determines transportation aid? One is your property values. Your property values do a lot to determine your transportation aid. There's a big formula. It's like 2 or 3 pages long. It works great. But the thing is that it's your property values mostly. The other thing is, how many pupil miles do you drive? Now, some of it's allowable pupil miles, and some of it isn't allowable pupil miles. So there's all kinds of definitions. How many people do you employ in the system? You have contract busing, right? How much is the contract? What is it for? So there's a whole formula for this thing, and you'll only get a partial reimbursement for your total costs. So it depends upon, maybe, you take the kids to the sectionals up in Albany, or states up in Albany or something. Maybe you have additional costs. They allow that, boom, you get a little more aid that year. Or you buy more transportation routes, right, or something like that. So it vacillates up and down. The next one is building aid. Building aid moves around based on your debt service schedule and all your capital projects. Right now, your building aid is actually streaming out about 15 years, just like your debt service. All your debt service is on a 15-year schedule usually. If you build a new building, that building would be on a 30-year schedule. If you do an addition to a building and the addition costs more than the renovation, it's on a 20-year schedule. So what happens here is most years 15-year schedules. That means this. That means over the next 15 years, you'll be paying off some of that debt, which also means that aid for that debt will cease to exist. This wreaks havoc on the on the tax cap. So what districts normally do is this. They look and they see, okay, when am I having a debt drop off? It's going to drop off my aid. Now, if I could do a project that the new debt would be equal to the debt that's falling off, I can stabilize the tax cap, and I could probably advertise that this capital project perhaps has no increase in taxes associated with it. And that's how you keep it stable. If you miss that drop off, absent any savings you made from a reserve or a huge cash down payment, you will have a tax increase because of the capital project. Your tax cap history tells me this has not been planned very well here. It has been not planned at all very well here, and I'll be able to demonstrate that for you when we get there. The next one is BOCES aid. Now, BOCES aid. Now, you think of BOCES, first thing you think of is probably students with special needs programs and career and technical education. Well, that's not true. These students with special needs will not be paid in BOCES aid. It has nothing to do with BOCES aid. It's in foundation aid. Students with special needs are in foundation aid. And they're also in the next two categories, public and private excess cost. Those two next ones down there. Because those are for high needs, high cost special ed kids. So let's just go through the BOCES aid. Mostly it's CTE, career and technical education. All right? It's also for staff development. It could be different types of programs that you may enter in at BOCES. So it could be technology that you buy through BOCES. It could be any leasing that you do through BOCES, like for copiers. It could be maintenance for your tech, that type of thing. Repair services. So there's tons of things that come under the BOCES umbrella. And that's what BOCES aid is for. Interesting about BOCES and transportation aid, to put the two together, you pay the money up front for whatever you're going to do, and the payments start the year afterwards. And BOCES, the BOCES aid comes in the year after you buy the service. In transportation aid, it comes in over 5 years after you claim the aid. For the bus, exactly, or transportation, so it takes time. The next one is public and private excess cost aid, those next two. High cost special needs children. So what this means is, let's just say, for instance, when I was a BOCES superintendent, I had a very huge BOCES. I probably have 4 or 5 buildings per center, and I had 4 or 5 centers. So we covered 1,800 square miles, 48,000 kids. So we had a whole building filled with kids on the first floor with wheelchairs, fed through tubes, and had their own nurse. Are you picturing this? Okay, I mean like severely disabled, all right? So those programs are very expensive, as you can imagine. All right? So what happens here is there's a special aid category for high-cost kids. Could be also, I had another 4 kids who are high in the autism spectrum. No communication skills, did not talk, barely walk, barely looked at anybody. Very, very difficult, very hard. But the thing is obviously these are the kids that are most needy in every school system. So what happens? They're high cost too. Your school district basically has a formula. And what happens is you have to pay the first tens of thousands, and I mean a lot, of the cost right off the bat. So you reach a threshold. Every district every year has a different threshold. There's a formula for it. Once you reach that threshold, then you get a percentage above that threshold back. So in other words, let's just take a quick look. So if you're getting public excess cost aid of $582,000, you could be easily spending $750,000, $800,000 to get it. Does everybody understand what I'm getting at? These programs, while they're for the neediest kids and educationally the most needy, our heart goes out to them. The cost is high, so it does have an impact on budgets overall. And we're starting to see more of this across New York State. That's why we have actually asked, I've lobbied actually, to have the legislature and the education department review what they call the cost screens. In other words, those thresholds and percentages to increase them. Because what happens is it's driving districts broke, to be absolutely honest with you. We're having a hard time. In other words, we want to keep up. We have, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's federal as well as state regulations on all this. And so what happens is to meet those regulations, it's very expensive, and I think the state education department wants to increase the reimbursements, but cannot do it without legislative and the governor approving. They haven't moved in probably over a decade and a half. So, I mean, it's like, you know, may as well be buying a Ford Pinto versus today's car, and give me a break. Now, the private excess cost aid would be more like schools for the blind, schools for the deaf, private excess cost aid. It's funny because there's a difference in the way the cost screens work, the reimbursements. The private is actually it's less expensive for the district dollar for dollar than is the public, which is strange, but I think it's to keep the schools for the blind and the schools for the deaf going, so that's all right. All right, now you've got software, library, textbook, and hardware aid next. And these pop around a little bit because these are based on how many kids you have because they're paid per student. Right now, we've lobbied the legislature to try and increase some of these, and I think we've got the Senate and the Assembly thinking about increasing library aid. So that would be very, very helpful. So it's just an amount per student. One proposal is go up to $11.50, and the other proposal is going up to $11.33. So you can see they're really giving it all they got. So, but at least it's an increase. But you'll notice they're not big aid categories. And we always want districts to use all those aid categories. They have to prove that they're buying those things in order to get that aid. Then the next thing down here, whoops, let me skip down to the orange one, is the universal pre-K. Universal pre-K, this money is supposed to be seed money to help you start the program. It's not supposed to fund the whole program. There's very few school districts I work with in New York State that actually this money is enough to run the program. Sometimes when you work with a private entity, sometimes it works out that way, but it's very difficult in public education because there's pension costs, you know what I mean? There's a whole bunch of other things associated with public schools. So it's supposed to be seed money. That money is going to be subtracted from the total. If you look down at the bottom of the page, you actually see it says total without UPK. That's because that money goes into the special aid fund. It does not go into your budgeted general fund. It's a special fund. So in other words, it doesn't really run your school district per se. Does that make sense? And you're supposed to tap that money. Now, can you get all the money every year? The answer is no. They tell you what is the maximum you're eligible for if you hit all the rules. Types of classes, class sizes, number of sections, kids slots, you know, to fill kids' seats and things like this. There's a whole bunch of regulations and there's different tiers of payment. So what happens is that's sometimes available. The problem school districts have with that one is sometimes they don't have enough room to fill all the slots. In other words, you got to have the rooms, the physical rooms. You have to have the staff. You have to have the resources because whatever goes past that number, if you fill all the slots, it's on your dime, no reimbursement, right? Right out of the budget. Obviously, an excellent educational program to have. Supplemental public excess cost aid. This was another aid category about 15 years ago that it's gone away. They keep paying everybody. In your case, you get a whopping $617 a year for the last 15 years for no reason at all, because they don't know what to do with it, because they made an error when the calculations came out. Some districts got thousands, so they didn't want to take any money away. And then last but not least, I've got the total without UPK, which is really what we're after. Then if you'll notice, I'm adding on now the rest of the story here. And if you look at the rest of the story, you'll see the difference in 24-25, let's go back up to foundation aid, was 0. Notice you've got no increase in foundation aid, it's 0. Now if you notice, foundation aid is the largest number on the page. Notice that. It is the biggest number. You're heavily dependent on that aid category, right? That's like what they call unrestricted aid. It's your money. Do it with it as you see fit. The problem is when you get no increase, it automatically curtails your revenues during a year when your expenses continue to escalate. It's like the boss said, listen, no raise for everybody this year, but I'll think about it next year. Well, you go, okay, I guess. We can't do anything about it, but your costs continue to escalate. And that's really the situation with the district in a practical sense. Now, for next year, it's looking somewhere around it's about 2.5%. Now, why would it all of a sudden go up? Well, there's a couple of reasons. The run we're using, the run or the state aid data that we're using in this example is what's called the executive proposal run. This is the run by the governor of the state of New York. She wants this to be the budget. So she said, this is what I want to do with foundation aid. So in your case, it's going up 2.5%. Why would it all of a sudden go from 0 to 2.5? I believe there's two reasons. One, it's an election year. State aid tends to be more robust in an election year. Now, here's the interesting fact. You've heard of the Rockefeller Institute, the study? Okay. She charged the study with trying to take money away from districts that were saved harmless. In other words, didn't get aid last year. So she had them come up with a proposal to do it. As soon as they published how to do it, within an hour, because I get this stuff, within an hour, she put out a news release saying she was no longer interested in that. But I think it's because it's an election year, she didn't want to have legislators or her sign a bill taking money away from districts like yours. So she made it, so what happens is, that's one factor. The other factor is she changed 3 parts of the formula. 2 affect you. One is the census data. In the foundation aid formula, it's 45 pages of explanation and algebra. It's just, what happens is they use the 2000 census to determine community poverty. The 2000 census is 25 years old. There was no political will to change it. Everybody was afraid of what would happen. So finally, I think most of us that lobby these guys, we fell over the cliff, so we're glad. So they replaced it with something known as the Small Area Income Poverty Estimate. Technical name for updated census. So now your community looks poorer than it did in 2000. I think that helped you get more aid. Okay. Now it's relative, right? Everybody could be making more money, but you're poorer relative to everyone else. Okay. The second thing she did is what they call economically disadvantaged. Remember how you used to count how many kids were on free and reduced price lunch? Right? And then you go to a CDEP program, Comprehensive Eligibility Program, where everybody gets breakfast and lunch. Okay, what happens was, then parents did not turn in the forms to qualify you for a poverty measure known as free and reduced price lunch. That term is written into law. She's actually going to cross that out and put in a term called economically disadvantaged. So now she's going to look in your community, find out kids are in community eligibility for food stamps, heating program, Medicaid reimbursements, things like this. So she's expanded the definition of poverty. So it's helped many rural schools. So those two have helped rural schools all over. You too have to be beneficiaries as well. So it's going up 2.5. The legislature wants to make sure everybody gets around 2.9 to 3%. So we'll see how this fares out. Now remember, the budget's supposed to be passed by April 1, but last couple of years not on time, so we don't know when this will be. We're hopeful that maybe you can get a couple more bucks out of this if the legislature wins this argument. Now for the next 3 years, you'll notice I got 2% down at the bottom of the page, because I really don't know what's going to happen after her election year, but I do tend to find out that there are legislative election years, and they don't want to take any money away either. So I'm going to put in 2% to see how it fares out with a long-range plan, as if you've got this small increase. But if you'll notice, look at the size of the increase. It's it's 357, 364,000. You can see it in orange at the top. So it's not like a monumental amount based on the size of your school district and your budget. For transportation, building, BOCES, public and private access costs, I've actually kept them running on automatic pilot except for building aid. And you'll see you're going to have a little drop in building aid in the 26-27 year, which may be very sad, because we really would never want to see that. Because what we should probably have been doing is a year or two ago of planning a capital project to make sure that did not happen, because that's going to be a depressor on your tax cap right when you need more revenue. So there might be ways around that, but I'm not your financial advisor. I suggest you talk to them, see if they can find a way out for you. But I think that's something that could have been considered. That's why I like the long-range planning. Software and library materials, I kept going the same thing, and because everything else is pretty much an automatic pilot. The one we really worry about is foundation aid, because it's so valuable. Now, the other thing too is, this is based on the executive budget, includes that SAPE I told you about, SAIPE, for census, economically disadvantaged instead of FRIPL, free and reduced price lunch. But updated pupil counts, there's the other thing. Here's the thing you've got to keep in mind. If you ask me what our foundation aid is going to be, I have no idea. This is the latest. Here's why. The district submits data in October based on what they know about their student population. That creates what they call a November run. They run all the formulas based on that data. Then what happens is they submit more data in January, updated data. But with that data goes your beds. In other words, your actual real enrollment for Beds Day. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's an actual, you count every kid and their demographic. You hand it in. It's the official record of the district. Then they update that run. But they update it based on the current formulas. What the governor did is she took the first run, changed part of the formulas, and ran different numbers. So we have 3 different sets of numbers. Okay? So they vary a little bit, but I think you're going to come out on top by the time this is done with foundation.
So, just out of curiosity, once the governor and legislatures pass the budget, right,
Yep.
so for argument's sake, it is April 1st, when do districts usually see
The A run.
the A run?
Usually within a couple days, a day or two usually. They're getting better at getting it to us. And so that's what it'll be. However, that still won't be your aid. That'll be the aid then. Because then there's going to be a May run, then there'll be a June run, then there'll be a new November run, and then we'll know what your aid is. But we'll have a good idea. You got to keep in mind something. Every time your district submits any piece of data, changing student populations, kids going to this program, that program, different demographics occur, and so on. And what happens is they constantly update the formula. Constantly. It's constantly updated. So that's part of the dilemma. But it usually doesn't vary once we get to April. Or excuse me, yeah, once we get to April, the governor's budget. That's the best one. Okay. Now, let's try some scenarios. So long-range planning is really a research question, okay? And so I like the research. So here we go. We're going to do a little research question. So what we're going to do is I've got some, on the top I've got some assumptions. Estimates for tax levy, state cap at 2026, and thereafter I got a question mark. So you can decide what you're going to do, but I'm going to suggest right off the bat, without any qualifications, you get to that cap and you stay at that cap for the rest of your life. That's going to be my suggestion, and I think I can prove why. State aid will be a slight increase in foundation aid, which I already talked about. Transportation aid will be stable, and your building aid will follow that debt service schedule, which means it's going to go down. All right? Then for expenditures, we're going to follow your contractual obligations as we know them now. We're going to no notable changes in staff pattern compared to what they are now. Stable ERS and TRS increased costs. Now what's that? ERS and TRS are the pension systems. Remember I told you I'd studied that. And the reason I'm studying is because pension systems are really kind of an interesting phenomenon. First of all, you have people at different tiers in each pension system. The TRS is for the teachers, certified staff, be principals, dance, and that type of thing. And ERS is for like basically everybody else, non-certified staff. The ERS is going up 16%. The TRS is going down a little bit. But the TRS people make more money than the ERS. So there's a lot of moving parts here. But even if the pension system that the premium they're going to use, that rate stayed exactly the same, your cost will automatically go up because the rate will be multiplied times people's salaries, and the salaries are going up. Unless there are, now picture what I'm going to say, unless there are less salaries. You understand it? Otherwise, it's going up. Okay? All right, so we've got to keep an eye on that. Next, we got a top probable health insurance escalation. Health insurance is starting to be a real issue. I'll show you in a second. So let's just kind of do this. We'll go through the little boxes I've got for you here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go for, in 25, 26, we're going to go with the cap at 3.43, and I put 3.25 across. Now that doesn't mean that's the cap. It's down at the bottom in red. I got a little disclaimer. We don't know what your cap is. We don't know what inflation will be. We don't know what the growth index will be. So there's a couple things we don't know, so we can't actually calculate it. But here's the research test. Can this district survive based on what we know is going to happen to their costs if taxes stay at the rates I just put in blue? Everybody get what I'm trying to do? So that's the test. All right, so what we've got here then would be a difference in taxes over the 25 to 30 year. And remember how state aid is done, everyone. 25 means 24-25 school year. All right, so in the parlance of school district finance, the date given is June of that year, right? So it's the end of the year. So going from the 24-25 year to the 29-30 year, you see an increase using those blue rates, about $8 million to 17.5%. Everybody with me? Okay. Now, the pilot does tend to move around a little bit, but you got a real small pilot. Okay, I've got districts that have millions of dollars in pilots, and they wish they didn't, but they do. Because pilots crush your tax cap. We're going to go over that in a few minutes. But the idea is, I got your state aid here from that previous page of state aid. Okay, so we're all on the same page. Federal Medicaid. Now your Medicaid's going from 90 to 200. Why? You'll notice. See that? If you look at the first 2 years. And that's because we're trying to make it a little more accurate. The district was really kind of underestimating it. It's closer to 200. So we're trying to get a little better budgeting here. Does that make sense a little bit? Now, will it stay at 200 forever? Can't tell. We hope so. It depends upon who you have for students and who's eligible for those programs, right? So that's how it works. So the next thing is interfund transfers. You'll see it goes 124, 120, and down to 25,000. This is really moving some of that money out of that debt service fund so you can say you're moving it. Does everybody understand what I'm doing here? Okay, so at least you're going to make an effort. Now, whether you move it or not, I don't know, but you're going to make an effort. Okay, because we want an effort. Okay? The next one is other revenues. Now look at the other revenues. 1.3, 1.7, 2.9. Wow. And this is because your district turned all the money into high interest-bearing accounts. So what your interim business official went and checked out some of the biggest high interest-bearing accounts available in New York State that are protected, and then went to your bank and said, can you match these? And if the bank matched them, that's where you put the money. So you made the best bang for the buck this year. So now, if we can keep that going, fine. Now, we don't know what's going to happen to the Federal Reserve, of course, so this one line is kind of hoping against hope that things keep going for us, because you got a good chunk of cash. But you know what? This line could decline over time, but let's just see what happens, even if we can keep this line up there. Let's just see if that's going to still help us. So what I do here is, now I've got the total revenues, and if you'll notice, between the 25 year and the 30 year, it's going up 10,383,000, or 14%. Everybody see how it works? Okay, now, next page, just follow along, because this is a big page, a lot on here. All right, so just don't get lost in this one. This is going to be real important. Okay, here we go. The test at the end, honestly, guys, is really hard, so just be careful. Here we go. So, this one here, I brought over the revenues, so you don't have to keep flipping back and forth, right? I'm a teacher, so I'm trying to make it easy on you. This way here, this open book, you know, the test, it's only 45 pages, but you'll get through it. Here we go. So, now let's look at the expenses, but let's go through it in pieces. Now, for some of you might be new, some of you might be experienced, but you have never experienced the uniform system of account codes like I have. So I had to do the city of Rochester and the city of Syracuse. I had to work my way through $900 million worth of codes in a couple of months. Believe me, it's an arduous task. So I made it real simple for you. Salaries and everything but salaries. Salaries, other. We're not going to count paper clips. We've got to know where the real money is. So here we go. General support salaries. Who the heck are the salaries in general support? First of all, it's the superintendent's office, including the superintendent. So anybody who works in the superintendent's office. It's the entire business office and all the people who work there, accounts payable, anybody who works in the business office. But a big part of it is operations, maintenance, groundskeeping, all that kind of stuff. Cleaners, custodians, maintenance mechanics, people who work outside. All those folks that work, the nights, the days, you know, cleaners, custodians, they're all in there. So those are a huge bulk of the salaries in rural school districts, all right? So that's who's in there. So that's general support. Think of it as the infrastructure for the district. Are we good? Now, what's in other? Other is easy. Heat, light, electricity. Think of it as utilities, okay? But there's something else in other. Could be maybe your school attorney's in other, but also there's BOCES administrative costs, and there's where the tech is sometimes bought for school districts in the other. Okay, in the other category for BOCES. So there's a whole bunch, but it's also the wax for the floor, the toilet paper, the paper towels. It's it's having a couple extra faucets on hand. Everybody understand what I'm getting at? It's everything for those types of things, right? It could also be the purchase of equipment, like maybe a lawnmower, or a dump truck, or a truck, or something. All those, for those of you who study this, be the 1600 codes. All right, now instructions. Next, you'll notice it's the biggest number in the page, and it's supposed to be the biggest number in the page. It's the purpose of the school district. All right, instruction. This starts, who's in instruction? Starts off with the principals. It doesn't start off with the teachers, it starts off with principals. So there's principals and their teachers, guidance counselors, behavioral specialists, the school nurses in there, elementary teachers, high school teachers, special ed teachers, general ed teachers, coaches are in there, class advisors are in there, right? So everybody that deals with a kid every day is in there. Okay, so it's the biggest number on the page. And the next one is other. What is other? Other is all that sending kids to BOCES for CTE and special ed. That's all in other, right? But it's also the books, the textbooks, the library materials, right? It's the balances for the science department, chemicals for chemistry. It's the balls for the PE department, right? Whatever they use. So that's what's in there. So let's just stop at those 4 categories and let's start measuring this out a little bit. So let's go back to general support. General support is expected to go from about $3 million to $3.3 million, about $269,000. Everybody with me? Other is going to go from $3.8 million, I'm going to 25 now, to 5.2, which is 1.449 million. Everybody with me? Instruction, 29.8 to 33, almost 8, 13%, or 3.9 million almost. The next one, other, 11 million to around 12 million, 8, increase of 1.8 million, 16.8. One thing you should realize as board members is I put percentages in here because board members like them. I don't know why, because they're unreliable, and let me prove to you why. Everybody goes, well, this went up 4%. Same thing with taxpayers. This goes up that percent, this percent. Well, here we go. Your entire revenue went up $10 million, was 14%. Here I have salaries going up $4 million, it's 13%. The percents are useless. You don't spend any percents. You spend dollars. Follow the money. So let's just take a look at it. Now we go down to transportation. I got salaries. Just got somebody overseeing it, really. And other is your contract, going from about $5.7 million to around $8.4 million, 2.7 up. Everybody with me? All right, now let's go to employee benefits. The top to health, going from 13.4 to 19.8, 6.3 million. Everybody with me? So let's just do this. Take all the red parts and let's just add them up under the 25-30 difference. So these two here, let's make it 1.8 million, and 4, everybody with me? 4 is what, 1.5? Anyone? 5.8? 6, 7.5? 8, 9, say 10, and then we have health insurance, 16. So we added up just those numbers. Are they bigger than this number on top? Yeah, by a lot. So what I'm trying to say is we haven't even finished the spreadsheet yet. And your expenses just in the red numbers are outpacing the entire revenue of the district in the same period of time. That's going to be a big problem. Okay. Now, let's go down. Here's your building debt service. You see some movement here. You can see some going down. That's that payment off debt service. Your BOCES capital projects being paid off. You do not have a RAN or a TAN. What the heck is that? A revenue anticipation note or a tax anticipation note. People say, aren't we supposed to spend the budget out? The answer is no. The budget has to be big enough so no matter who shows up, you have enough money to pay for it. So you need money in the budget for cash flow. Okay, and I'll explain more about that in a second. But the key thing is that what's going to happen is if you have adequate cash flow to pay your bills, because your state aid doesn't come in equal installments, and taxes don't show up until November, correct? Okay, so what the heck happens? Where do you get the money from? You have to have cash flow. If you don't, you have to go borrow it, either in a revenue anticipation note because you're waiting for state aid to come in, or a tax anticipation note because you don't have enough money to even make it till the taxes come in. So districts have done this in the past, right? And so what happens is it kills your bond rating. Now it looks like you're a wounded warrior. In other words, it's kind of like I need money to pay my mortgage, so I go get 3 or 4 loans. Then I go get a loan for a car, and they give me a higher rate. This is what happens. You have now, you don't have that right now. We don't have that in there. But if you won't have enough cash flow by the time we're done, you're going to need to do that. Those 3 end up zeros in the end. We'd have to actually add numbers to them, which would increase your costs because you wouldn't have enough cash flow. That's one of the things we gotta take out and look for. So here we go. Technically speaking, the way your expenses are going at about 16.5 million, at the same time, your revenues are going at about 10 million, 10.3, 10.4. So as we look long-term, you have a problem. Would I say you have a problem right this second? Absolutely not. No. But if we don't start solving this problem right this second, you'll have a bigger problem later. Does that make sense? So that's what we're going to talk about. So let's kind of put it together and show you how this all works. Now this next part is very complicated. So even if I got to come back and explain it 4 more times, it's okay. Because this is going to, we're going to really start moving things around now. So I put your revenues and expenditures on top, and I've got this thing called adjustments carryovers. You notice the first one in orange is 1.4 million. Last year, your budget. What you do is you come up with how much you want to raise in revenues that you budget for revenues. Is that what you want the revenues to come in at? No, you want them to come in higher than that. You always want to underestimate your revenues. Why? Same thing as you never want to underestimate, you never want to overestimate your paycheck. It's your revenue. The thing is, if the revenues don't come in, you can't tax again. There's no other place to get money except borrowing it from yourself, your own savings account. So you always want to underestimate revenues to some degree. Expenses, you always want to have money left over. You don't want to spend out the budget because that money left over is part of the cash flow. So last year's 1.4 and next year's 3.12. Now why did you have 3.12? And I've got a little explanation there for you. And that's because you experienced really a premium lag where you were actually able to save almost $2 million out of the blue, which isn't going to happen again, I doubt it. So out of the blue, you lucked out. You're ready to pay it, but they gave you a premium holiday for the health insurance. So you had a one-time savings. Does that make sense to you? But it isn't coming back, I doubt. I doubt it's coming back because usually they can't do it twice. Then we see 1.5 thereafter. That's because your budget's getting tighter, which means is there's going to be less left over at the end of each year. But that's part of your cash flow. So what's that 1.5? Part of your cash flow. Now you notice under adjustments for the reserves, I've got nothing. Because what I'm going to test is, will you need to use any of your reserves that you have? So what I'm going to do is then look at the 4% you're supposed to have. So that number in the blue plus the number in the yellow is your cash flow. Think of it this way. July 1 comes and hardly anybody's here, right? Central office is working, and then what happens is you've got O&M working, right? Operations and maintenance, they're cutting the grass. You know, you're paying health insurance though for everybody, and they're not even here, right? You're paying Social Security for people that are working, right? You're paying on your pension systems. Your pension bill, by the way, comes in over the summer. So what happens is you've got to have all that money. Then miraculously, in the last week in August, first week in September, everybody shows up. Now you've got to pay the entire transportation system. You've got to pay all the faculty, staff, the nurse, the guidance counselor. You've got everybody, full swing, all full salaries, right? Coaches have started, class advisors have started. Think about it. In the middle of the summer, you had to buy all the materials and things to run the school district for the whole year. So you can imagine, your state aid's biggest check, your biggest check from the state comes in the month of March. Not September, not July, March. That means you have to front almost the whole district for a while. Everybody understand what I'm getting at? So you need cash flow. So far, it looks like we might have it. Well, maybe. Where's the rest of the money? So in full disclosure, let's talk about where the rest of the money is. So what happens here is that the difference between a budget revenue and a budgeted expense, we'll use the 25 years. So watch my little fingers here. 25 revenue, 74.182. Everybody see that? Expenses budgeted, 77.4. Anybody see a problem? Yeah. The revenue is what? It's $3,234,000 less than the expenses, right? Oh boy, what does that mean? That's called the appropriated fund balance. So here's what's going to happen. That means if you spend out that entire budget like somebody wants you to, and you only get the revenues than you budgeted, you're going to have to find in your cash and reserves $3.2 million to pay everybody. That's why we want money left over and our revenues to be good. So we have money left over. Now here's the dilemma. So what's going to start moving around is this. If you look at the bottom line, you'll see total fund balance June 30th, and you'll see it starts to diminish. Okay, and part of it diminishes because what's going to happen in the next year, so far the current budget, which is not set in stone yet, right? Still working on a budget. It looks like we're going to be 2.24 million short. That health insurance is going to help out for that 1 year. So we're going to be 2.4 million short. We're bringing over 3 million. But if you'll notice up here where it says assigned appropriate fund balance, you'll see 3.2, 2.2. See it? That money could be sitting in your reserves. In other words, it doesn't move. In other words, you could add that money to your reserve line and still have the right amount of reserves, but it's spoken for in case that budget is spent out. You understand how that works? So it's spoken for. And if you go on to each year, what happens is your budget then starts to get, starting in 27, more out of balance. You can see the bottom line, minus 35, then got minus 5, then minus 7, then minus 9. You don't have that much money. So what happens is, slowly what's going to happen is you're going to have to set more of the money aside that's on the bottom of this chart out of your reserves, and look what's happening to your reserve line. In other words, you could still be sitting in there physically, but you can't spend it unless you spend out the budget. So you technically are going to run out of money. So let's think about it. The research question was, if you went to the cap and then at 3.25, right? And you kept that interest going, there's all those revenues, and you got the little state aid increases along the way, but your expenses keep going the same way you're going, where will you be in 5 years? You'll be in big trouble. Very big trouble. So that's the story. Now, keep in mind, we had 4.703 in capital reserves, didn't we? Remember that? Your next capital project? Well, that's gone. There will be no capital project. Because we just spent it trying to run the school district. So now we have to go to voters and ask them to release the money so we can run the school district. This is why you look long term. A budget may look like it's an annual thing, and certain things look like a good idea at the time. The question is, what's going to happen if we keep on the same trajectory? Now, let's take a look at this. Let's talk tax cap, because this is going to be very important. So what I'm going to do is run through a lesson on how the tax cap works. I got to tell you, there are very few people who really understand this. I've been doing lessons like this for the last 3 years. It's killing me. Here we go. So how it works. It starts off with a levy. In other words, how much was collected in taxes in the previous year. I'm going to use 40,000 to keep the math a little easier. 40 million. So that means this district, in the 21-22 school year, the year before, it collected $40 million. The next number is it's multiplied times the tax-based growth factor, and it's multiplied. And if you'll notice, the number is greater than the number 1.0041. What does this mean? This means, basically, that your tax base has grown. It's a multiplier, so you go get the money. Colloquial example. It's Thursday night at Rick Tim's house. 4 guys come over to play poker. With Rick, it's 5. We all throw $1 in the kitty. The winnings is $1. That's our base, tax base, right? It's our collection. Mr. 6 shows up. We don't all take out like money to keep it to 5, do we? No, they throw in their money because they're increasing the base. There's more to win. Everybody understand how a tax base works? So when the tax base gets bigger, what happens is if you hypothetically, the tax base keeps getting bigger. Say you could levy taxes at 4%, on an average, people's taxes could go up 3%. Because there's more to tax. So you've got to take a look at that. We didn't have enough time to make it to this meeting to study that, but it'd be worth studying what's going on there. But this is this district anyway. So we multiply it, so you go get the money. Then we add back the pilots. Now pilots are payments in lieu of taxes. I think everybody knows what a pilot is, I believe, right from the IDA, where they, instead of paying taxes on the tax levy, they actually give you a separate check, right? It's a grant from like an IDA, Industrial Development Agency or something. So that's just so you know how much you collected in property value worth, okay? Then you subtract from it the capital levy from the prior year. What the heck is a capital levy? The capital levy is, you take your debt service schedule, looks like your mortgage schedule, You add up your principal plus interest, and you subtract any aid. So let's just say you had $500,000 worth of principal payments, $100,000 worth of interest payments, your debt service would be $600,000. You subtract from it the state aid. Say the state aid you got on your building aid was $400. Then that number would be $200. In other words, that's the amount you're supposed to get from the taxpayers. How do I know you're supposed to get it from the taxpayers? That's because the taxpayers voted for you to take it from them. If you go back in the minutes anyone you want, and look at every single capital project you've ever had, in the resolution, there's words to the effect, and levy the tax thereto. It's in there all the time, it's required. Because when you do a capital project and the school district borrows money, they're tax-free bonds. If this district wanted to dissolve itself, the state would come in and create a board of education and continue to tax the people in the old district until the debt was paid. It's required by law. So what the tax cap is telling you, okay, let's take out last year's amount so we have room to put in next year's amount, which is on the bottom half of the formula. But before we do that, we take it out, then we multiply it times the allowable growth factor, the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. Now, the Consumer Price Index deals more with washers and dryers and cars and trucks than it does schools, but that's what the law says to do. So we have to use it. So in this case, if you notice, the CPI was really under 2%. It was 1.23. So we multiply the number by 1.0123. Right? Now, why are they multiplying it? That's because the tax cap, the legislature says, well, if inflation is hitting the school district, things are going to cost more. They should be able to collect more. So let's let them go do it. Makes sense. Then what they do is they take the pilots out for the next year. You'll notice this pilot is 182.95, is it 999? We're taking out because that will not be collected in the levy. That will be collected separately. So we know we're going to get that money. Okay? Then you add in the new capital levy, 801,618, which is the new capital levy for the next year. Please notice that 801 is larger than 517. The money going out of the formula was last year's impact on local share of capital projects, which was 517. This year's new number is 801. So it is larger than the number going out. Therefore, it's going to push the cap up to pay for the capital project. Okay? Now, so now the new levy limit is 40,926,000 or 2.3159%. Please note, it is not 2%. We can make it 2% by lying about one of the numbers, but other than that, it's going to be hard to exactly get 2% because some of these decimals are like 5 or 6 decimal places. Does everybody see how what I'm getting at? So my point is there's no such thing as the 2% tax cap. There never has been, probably never will be. Where did it get its name? It got its name from that CPI. If the CPI in the United States next year, or coming this year, excuse me, was 80 bazillion %, that number in the tax cap calculation could not be more than 1.02. And that's what's happened in the past. A lot of times, matter of fact, this year is going to the same thing. You're going to have a 1.02 in your formula, but inflation is 2.8 to 3.1 right now. So that's where it's limiting. That's where they got the name tax cap 2%. The amount you collect isn't 2%, just that one line out of the 8 steps. Right with me so far? All right, now, here's what happens next. In the next year, you'll notice if we collect the cap, this levy limit here, I got a little arrow, that's where you start your computation for the next year. In other words, you start where you left off. And it just keeps going right along. Now, I've standardized some of the numbers to make it easier. For instance, if you'll notice, I've actually stabilized the debt service. See the capital levy is stabilized now at 801? And you'll notice I stabilized the cap. And what did it do, or the pilot, and what did it do to the levy? Now, flattened it right out. Okay? Now, here's the problem. The problem comes when we don't follow that rule that I just went over. So if you go to the next page, this is what the tax cap would look like if once I stabilized it in the second year, and I just kept it going every year. And you can see how it kind of flattens right out at some number. Everybody see that? See how it works? All right. Now, what happens when there's a problem? inevitably at some board meeting, or somebody says something to somebody says something like this. 2.3? I thought it was a 2% cap. Well, everybody thinks it's a 2% cap, what are we gonna do? Well, you gotta remember, you are the CFOs of the district. You are the chief financial officers. It's your duty to explain to everybody it isn't 2% if it isn't 2%. That's not easy to do, but it is your duty. So sometimes somebody will say, tell you what, instead of that 2.3, let's make it 1.9. I mean, who would know the difference? Everybody would be happy. Nobody's gonna make a big stink. It's under 2 that everybody thinks it is. What the heck? Let's do it. Everybody's all right. Yeah, what the heck? It's not a big deal. Well, let's find out. So here we go. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the same calculation I gave you the first time, where I got the 2.3159%, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it to 1.99. Everybody see that? Now look underneath the 1.99. The number you should see is 796,000. See that? That means if you collect the 1.99 instead of the 2.3, you're going to collect $796,000 more to run your school district compared to the original number, which is down over here, 926. So in other words, you're not going to collect $130,000. Everybody with me? Okay. So it doesn't sound like the end of the world. But let's think about this for a second as a practical matter. Because what people don't understand is they really don't understand how to use numbers. So here we go. The whole board's going to work for me Monday through Friday. You're going to do a project for me. If you do a good job, I'm going to give you $100. If you're like the average person, you're already counting that by Friday you'll have $500 in your pocket, and I won't. And because you're going to do a good job. You're good people. So you say, okay, let's get working on this thing. Now, while you're working on it, here's what I'm thinking. I'm Mr. Taxpayer Businessman, and here's what I'm thinking. What was I thinking when I promised them $100? I don't want to give them $100. I should have said a lower number. I mean, I want to save all the money I got. I mean, why am I giving my money away? This project's done. Here it is Monday at the end of the day. Take a look at your project, and I say this. Wow, nice job, you guys. Pretty good. Pretty darn good. But I tell you something, it's not exactly what I had in mind. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you $90. So now you are short $10, correct? And I have your $10. So then you just think together, wow, we better work harder on this so we get the $100 tomorrow, Tuesday. So you get together, you get to own on your project, Tuesday comes along, and I'm looking at it and going, wow, they really worked hard. But something else is going through my head. I do not want to give them $100. Besides, they took 90 yesterday, what are they going to do about it? I'm going to give them 90 again. So I give you $90. So you're short $10 on Tuesday, correct? It's interesting because now I have $20 more in my pocket than I would have had, and you have $20 less because you're really short $20, not 10. If we keep this up by Friday, you will be short $10 on Friday again, but you will be collectively short $50 each, and I will have $50 in my pocket for each of you. So I got the money I promised to give you. But then I feel guilty. So, gee, let me make it up. So here's a big math question for the board. Ready? CFOs. I want to give you a 5% raise. How much is the raise?
Us on the board.
What is it?
Us on the board?
Yes.
Nothing.
5% raise.
As an example.
Yeah, it's an example.
Okay, oh, the $100 is.
Yeah. Okay, it's not of the $100. That's interesting. I think it's going to be the 90 because that's all I've been giving you. So you get a $4.50 raise instead of a 5. So I got you again. I got you again. And here I was being magnanimous. So I'm sitting here with money. It could have been yours. How's your household economy doing based on this schema? Not good. So let's try it. So here we go. So now we go to this page here. We say, okay, let's leave 130 on the table. And what we're going to do is now we're going to start over our new calculation. But our new calculation won't start off with 40,926,000. It's going to start off with 40,796,000. Everybody see it? So I have just decreased your rate of increase forever. You understand what I just did? Forever. forever. So what happens? So you just got, here's your $2, see the 2,144? That's your 50 cents you lost. See how this works? Now look at it this way. If I were to run this thing, here's how it would work. Look at this. And if I compare it to what we could have had, here's what we did. We lost 130,000 on Monday, right here. See Monday? I also lost 130 on Tuesday, remember? 130 again. Are you with me in the story? Plus the 2144 because we decreased the levy. The next year we lost another 130 plus the 2144 from the previous year and another 2179 because we decreased the levy. Go all the way over to the other side to make this an easier story, and you are behind, if you look down, grand total loss, $673,000 that is somebody else's pocket that was supposed to be used to run your school district. But let's make it worse. If you were to go back and compare the levy, what it is now in this example, compared to what it could have been, the levy is an additional, look at this, $139,133 difference. So you're really behind $812,640. See that? So here's the thing. This is when the board forgot it was the Board of Ed, turned into the Board of Friends, Taxpayers, and Relatives. Because your job is to make sure this institution stays vibrant. These kids need you. You are all they got. So let's just take a look at it. Here's another thing. What happens if you didn't stay to the cap twice? Look at this one. I did one the year before plus the 1.9. Now look how much. They just did it twice. Look, I even went back one more year. 1.785 million. Now here's the thing. If this district doesn't need 1.785 million, we're good. But if they do, we're in big trouble. Because you can't get it back. Well, you can, but it would hurt like a lot. So here we go. What are the other factors? Here we go. The CPI changes. Here's an example right here. I've got the same models in here. All I did is change the CPI. Look how the tax cap changed. Look at when I finally got to 2%. See the bump in the cap? Because the cap's telling you, go get the money. Then I did another example here. Pilots. I changed the pilot. When a pilot comes into your tax cap, it depresses it, all things being equal. When it goes off, it makes your tax cap go way up. Look at the page. Why does it go way up? Because the people paying the pilot are now in the tax base. You've got to go get their money from them. That's where they're sitting right now. That's why they don't pay the pilot. So what happens here, as you can see, look at this example. The pilot is going up. It depressed the cap down to 1.3. Look at the next example over farther on the right. The pilot went down. The tax cap goes up to 4.2. Did you do anything to get the tax cap up to 4.2? No. It's the pilot. Those people are not paying the pilot anymore because they're sitting in the tax base and they're waiting for you to tax them. But if you don't tax them, you're going to lower everybody's taxes. Because you're going to be sitting there going, well, we got a 4.2. Oh my God, nobody wants a 4.2. Not your fault. If you don't do the 4.2, you can't get your money out of what the people are paying the pilot. Then there's another one here. Local share of debt. Look at this example. Local share of debt drops. So tax cap goes down. You can see it right here. That's when your capital project starts falling off. That's the year you want to have new debt so it stays stable. If you look at the next example, look at it. It goes back up. Now you got a big tax increase. So the idea is you got to plan capital projects if you want it to be fluid, so there's no tax increase as a result of it. You got to do it at a certain time where debt hits your cap. So that's how it works. Now, this page here is if you followed the tax cap since its inception, what it would look like. This is that page right now. So I actually recalculated your entire tax cap from 1213. Now watch this. See all the red squares? Why did it go up? Look at it. It went up to 3.5. Why? You can see it right here. You can see it right here. Pension system costs. You can see over here. Why did this go down to 1.7? You'll notice, look at 2% inflation going down to 1.14. See it? Go to the next one. Why did this one go down to 0.24? Look how low it is. Look how low it is. Okay? Pilots receivable. Look at, you have hardly any growth. And look at the rate. The inflation went down again. So it's going down twice in a row. Then it goes back up. You can see here the difference. Why is it going back up? It's going back up, look, by almost a 1.25%. That's because what's happening here is you're changing your debt service schedule. You can do every one of these, and there's a reason why each date, everything changed. So you can explain it. You can see it. It's observable in the cap. Now, the next page on the top is what you did with the cap. So let's talk about that. Didn't collect. 12-13 didn't collect 17,691. Next year didn't collect 535,000. Why? You wouldn't collect the money for the taxpayers, for the pension system, or the capital project. So you paid for it out of your own treasury. Next year 3,100, 13,000, 34. 2 years at the cap. Then 129. The rest of the years at the cap. So what does this do to a district over time? Easy. There's the answer. Monday through Friday, Monday through Friday, Monday through Friday. So hypothetically, since the tax cap started, you're behind 7.9 million, and your levy right now is 915,000, almost 916,000 less than it would have been annually. Almost $1 million. You got to stick to the cap, even if it hurts. Now, I know last year you tried to challenge the cap. That was a very smart move. I know it didn't go well, but it was 34 votes with it. But I got news for you. Hell had no fury, right? You got to try, because that was the only way to save it, to be honest with you. Because you're going to need all the money you can get. So here's what my recommendations. First of all, keep in mind, you've got an interim business official. Your superintendent works like a dog. I got to tell you, every time I call him, he's working on something for me. So I got to apologize for dragging you through everything. And your interim business official, I tortured her to death. So she's probably too ill to come tonight. So, and your new business official will be just great. I love working with Mike. He's really fast in that update, so that's really good for you. But the key thing is the budget's not done. We could still have things happen where else you need more people on leave, more substitutes, more kids show up, need special programs, right? So to me, I usually tell all districts, I usually cut off expenses December 1 because we got to count the money. If it's mission critical and you need to do it for a kid or for a program or whatever, yes, you do it. But we don't just sit there trying to find out how we're going to spend out the rest of our budgets. The truth of it is every buck counts, especially where you guys are at. Next, B, the process is difficult. If you ask me right now, Rick, you gave us health insurance projections. Is that exactly how much your health insurance is going to cost? I have no idea. But I've got to tell you, that's your trend data if you keep everybody you got. And the problem you've got with many districts, and although you've right-sized a bit, the truth of it is, when COVID came in, we sometimes grew a lot of staff or kept a lot of staff. Things were more robust. But the thing is, once that federal money went away, it was all on your dime. And the longer you keep them, the more it starts draining your treasury and extrapolating those numbers into bigger numbers. Think of something. If we had a budget, I remember you saw one, say about 150,000, it's moving at 3 or 4%. That's one issue. But when you got an issue where you got something at $12 million and it's moving at 10%, you got a different problem. So whatever the issue is, so bigger numbers and bigger percents yield real problems. Cost reduction should always be away from the kids first. Now the truth of it is sometimes you try and economize, become more efficient. Every school district should every year. I was a superintendent, and believe me, I was trying to get my system more efficient, more effective every year. It's not as easy as it sounds, because you get to a point of, no returns. You're like hardly doing anything. But you got to try. But the key thing is, here's the problem. Inflation is a big problem for all school districts. It's not 2.8, it's not 3.1. Okay, the cost of textbooks, materials, lab equipment, insurances, and all kinds of stuff is not following the CPI. It's greater than the CPI. Okay, so that's a problem. The next one, reevaluate purchases and staff need. Listen, when you had everybody, I remember during COVID, we hired some people probably in every district to help these kids catch up and everything else. And that was nice when we had somebody else's money, but when we're looking at the future and it doesn't look too healthy, that need, all of a sudden we have to reevaluate what's more important than what else inside this district. And that includes student programs and everything else. Class sizes, enrollment, and retirements and things like this got to be taken into consideration. You got to start looking at what are we going to buy? What are we going to schedule? How are we going to schedule this? How are we going to get this stuff? So the thing is it's very difficult, but it's necessary. But here's the things you got to remember. School systems, sometimes there's a certain part that's on automatic pilot. If you need a physics teacher, you need a physics teacher. And they're not easy to come by. I think you've got a champion here, your new business official, but I think that's almost by luck if you think about it. Let's face it. Truth of it is, do you have 100 candidates or anything? No, I don't think so. Okay, so the problem is, it's starting to be a real problem in certain areas. So the thing is, all right, now monitor expenditures to the financial plan, limitations on revenues, salaries and benefits can overwhelm the district's finances versus any potential revenue gains. Now, this is really difficult for me to say because for 10 years I was a teacher union president. But the truth of it is, we can only have as many people as we can sustain. Otherwise, we drag the whole thing down. Does that make sense to you? We're going to have to make some tough choices, programs and things like this. So you're going to have to take a look at who's absolutely cannot work without them. Then you're going to have to adjust your revenues to go be able to pay for that. Right now, I only see a $6 million gap in 5 years. I think you got to do some major movement here. And don't forget, you got to develop a long-range plan because the cavalry's not showing up. I don't think the state's showing up real fast to help you out. The next thing is annually evaluate your reserves and fund balance for sustainability and liabilities. Some of those reserves are there for a purpose, and we're going to eat them up just running the system, I think, at this rate. Long-range financial and capital plans help to stabilize the tax cap and are a useful strategy, and if you missed that boat, I think at least 4 times looking at the tax cap. District must continue to right-size based on diminished enrollments and trend data, and that's going to be very hard. So I dug up some stats on your district. Right now in the current budget, take into account there's a number of positions that haven't been filled and the retirees are being replaced by people on a lower salary. Call that breakage. So that's helping. There's also an English language ELL teacher, we call them ENL teachers. There's some of those. For last year, there's 106 teachers on top step 20. Now, nothing against these people. I'm sure they all worked hard. I worked till retirement too. All right. My daughter's a teacher. Hello. But the thing is it's affordability question. Does that make sense to everybody? Nothing personal. For 25, 26, it's going to be 113. You have 15 people with 30 years or more of longevity. Normally it's 30 and 55 and out. So I think the thing is this is heavy. You're heavy on the top, which means is sometimes what happens is you start jettisoning the bottom, and that's your replenishment system. Very difficult. And I'm sure there's certain programs that are very important to you more than others. The key thing is tough decisions have to be made. This is a big, big jump. Oop, my screen kind of went away. You guys can read it still, though, right? Okay, right sizing has been successful, and it has helped you, but it's not enough so far. State aid, 2.5% increase in foundation aid isn't enough. I'm hoping for more. Oh, you know what? We haven't even taken into account zero-emission buses. If that mandate goes, I think we're all underwater. All right, so tomorrow, if you get a chance, find a phone, call the legislator, tell them to give this thing up, move it back 5, 6 years. We all want cleaner energy. I don't think we want the kids breathing the diesel fumes of the drivers either. We're all set with that, no problem. But you guys don't have. Listen, if your contractor starts buying these, so let's just say your contractor works for 5 districts in your area, and they buy one for a neighboring district. Who's going to pay for it? It isn't them. It's all of you. It's a business model. Think about it. It should change. So I get that thing moved back 5 to 7 years, fast. Next thing is monitor the tax cap. Note the growing use of the appropriated fund balance and be aware of supermajority. Remember, you tried to do the supermajority last time. You may have to try it again because you're going to need some cash fast. I do have to tell you that I think it was really heroic that you tried to go for the above the tax cap last year. I'm sorry you didn't make it. I'm going to tell you something right now. My analysis is telling me if you had made it, this wouldn't have been such a harsh talk tonight at all. You've been in a much, much, much better place. Think about it this way. Let's make up a number. If you could get 250,000 more for the next 5 years, that's 1.25 million. You understand what I just said? Just like, remember I was taking the $10 away from you? Now I'm giving it to you. So the key thing is you've got some tough decisions to make. But I think we've covered a lot, we've turned over a lot of rocks and everything else. You know, and I think the thing is we're all trying to do a good job. Everything sounds like a good idea at the time. So this is a case of where we just pull ourselves up by the bootstraps and make some tough decisions to go on. I already looked back, we know what happened back there. Now what are we going to do about it? It's where you should focus your attention. Are there any questions? Here's the thing, it's like drinking through a fire hose, right? It's great. I like to do this for a living. so
It was great, though. It was great.
Yeah, I hope it helps. Here's the thing. Obviously, you gotta have some good discussions. Dan's very good at this. Dan followed me along the whole way, no problem. He can always call me. If you have questions he can't answer. Show's a great resource. Mike's coming along very well. But the thing is, you got some tough decisions. Let's face it, it's not about just cutting expenses. It's also enhancing revenues. You gotta have both ends of the equation. This is where my dad used to say, I gotta get another job. I gotta get more income. So you're gonna have to probably reach out again. And how you do that, it's up to you. But the truth of it is, it's just you're in for a rough road within 5 years. He's probably in 3.5. Okay. Thank you for asking me to do this project. If there's anything else you need, I'm just phone calls away. If there's anything else, but I think we've got everything just about covered. We all set? Okay, we'll skip the test. All right. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can somebody do me a favor, just tell me how I get out of here and get back to where the blue doors were?
Mike, you want one?
Thanks. I can do everything except get out of here. Okay, good night, everyone. Be well.
Thank you so much.
So it's not on the agenda, but any discussion?
There was something else like that on the Facebook, like really get it out there.
Yeah, we can,
Maybe, I mean, something just to kind of lay out what we just spoken on. I know it was a lot, but I mean,
so we can have Ms. Condi kind of advertise that in this, like the whole video is available.
Yeah.
I think the presentation would be intimidating.
no, I feel people definitely need to see that, especially the tail end of this, quite frankly.
Yeah, I agree with, I also agree with, the point people to the video, unless you were following with it, we have to figure out some sort of graphic out for people to go to point people to a 90-minute video. This was a lot easier. Somehow it's that they get down, look at a couple of slides, and understand that these things. Just pointing to the videos. People aren't there.
It's like, hey, if you don't change things, if you do something to change this, like, we're in some serious trouble, 3-4 years.
So, I mean, immediately what I'm thinking in the moment is, right, the one slide that has the anticipated revenues and expenses, right, kind of walking through that, perhaps, and then another segment with the tax cap history.
Yeah, I think that was.
That's really important
super
to
high.
understand how that functions.
Yeah.
Right? And it was, yeah.
And then you can even collapse into the road, so it's not, it's details of the pilots and stuff, I don't think are that critical. It's really just why I have.
Very basic information to lay out.
Anything else? You bet.
I think especially with both him saying what he said about last year, about how close we came and how short we are now due to that vote last year. That needs to be said, that needs to be reiterated, because as we know, a lot of people on vacation, a lot of people who didn't show up, a lot of people who showed up to vote no, but they gotta know what that cost us as a district, for how long.
I think this, Dr. Ursig, this might have been what you just referred to, if I heard you correctly, but, and I think it came up last year, I think we did try to articulate it, but, does our community know how much we've left on the table? Right? Again, just repeatedly wanting to bring up that point that, okay, so what we've seen in the past is penny wise, pound foolish, right? We now are missing $7 million because we wanted to optically say it wasn't, 2%, it was 1.9, and then this obviously it's like any exponential activity, right, in mathematics. So, but that's not I don't find that to be readily accessible and digestible for your average person, right? Especially because a lot of times when you're thinking about how do you vote on a school budget, I mean, it does come down to just kind of some sound bites. So, you know, I guess, you know, my question is more rhetorical, but how do we, you know, really continue to, you know, develop the consumer's awareness of what it is that we're doing here? Because oftentimes that tax cap is, it is absolutely, it is the bottom line. It's a yay or nay based on that alone. But those longer term disadvantages, I mean, that's astounding. It's astounding.
And that we're not being bad stewards by going to the cap each year.
Yeah.
Right? That's, I mean, because that was what was, you know, conveyed, is that we were being wasteful and throwing things away and not, you know, and yeah. And
Yeah,
so,
I think-
and so that was, it was a demonstration of good leadership to have it be under that number. And so to be able to really articulate that, taking advantage of what is on the table, because we are running a district that functions this way, and that's being good stewards of the monies that are there.
I think it's a good point too, you know, especially because again, we're, you know, here we are, we've got a few months, you know, this is ongoing work, but also just recognizing, you know, the role that political expedience takes for people when they commit to these kinds of positions. Oftentimes, you know, the responsible stewardship goes out the door, it impacts your popularity. And when we look at this here that he's drawn out, 12 years, right, 13 years, that's significant. That's significant.
And I think, you know, something that came across is when you went below the cap for like the 1 year, it was probably to appease a community for 1 year, but it needs to be articulated that that impacts way more than 1 year. And, you know, I think people kind of look at the budget as as you mentioned before, as an annual thing, but we have to really look at it as having long-term impact to district overall.
Yeah.
And I appreciated that part about the tax cap, but I'm also thinking about what happened in 2006, 2007, and how that impacted the numbers that led into this. And, you know, that wasn't good for anybody, and we haven't dug out of that hole and find ourselves in others because of circumstances.
And as you mentioned, the state never did their part, and, you know, 17 years of not funding our foundation aid. So, I mean, there's a lot, and there's a lot to go forward with. So.
I think for you, Dan, like you need to try and do a very good job of conveying it, like what we need to do for the next 3 to 5 years to kind of dig ourselves out and really right the ship, as he said many times. Just and not just for our knowledge. I feel like honestly, I feel like I'm thankful that he came in because he gave me a lot of knowledge that maybe I wasn't quite clear on. But like for the stakeholders out there who maybe didn't see this, they really need to understand like it's DEFCON mode, whatever you want to call it. Like, you know, we need to fix this and we need to fix it now. And for the future of, you know, not just our kids, but the kids that are going to be coming up behind us as well. And it needs to be like, this is what the plan is for the next 5 years. Like, this is what we need to do to get back to, you know, being financially stable. This way, the taxpayers and stakeholders understand that. Like, it's not just we're pulling an arbitrary 4% number out of our, you know, whatever, out of the air. This is what it's going to take to get it back to, you know, in 5 years being, you know, we can get back to whatever it is, the standard tax cap at that point. But I think kind of helping people understand that, at least that maybe there will be, there's a game plan and there's maybe an end in sight of it to get back to where we need to be is key too. Because I've had a lot of people ask me about that.
I think it's also important to note that he said it has to be on both sides of the equation.
Yeah, 100%.
We're going to have to make some really difficult decisions about programs that are gonna stay, positions that are gonna stay or go or whatever. But it has to be on both sides of the equation, and that has to be explained out as well,
Agreed.
you know.
I don't think people understand in general, I mean, I didn't until I started thinking of how important the reserves are. And then I don't think anybody has a real clear idea of where Saugerties is compared to the surrounding districts from the reserve, like how well-funded some of our neighboring districts are. And I'm taking Kingston, the big district, out of it, places like Walker and York, what they have in reserves compared to us, and what it allows you to do long-term.
Just kind of a couple takeaways, for myself would be just analysis as well. So on the one side, I had the 2026, expenses. Six.
Yeah, it's on the line. It's on the line. First one's on, and the basement.
So that budget with the salaries, others, and so forth, that is kind of taking into account some of those reductions that I already mentioned in the last board meeting. So, not filling positions, replacing people in the lower side. So that's kind of what goes already in there.
What numbers in there? The expense lines?
The expenses, yes.
The expenses are at.
So take into account the reductions I mentioned last board meeting. Okay, so it's not just a rollover of current people, it's with those reductions and then moving forward, it's maintaining that same people in there. So that's kind of part of the justification as to why there's smaller increases than in other years. So that's number one. Number two, in the planning process, right, the other districts, right, have done, have I don't know, come seem like it's negative, but have planned better in terms of their reserves, in terms of capital projects and so forth. So all this has to be part of our conversation moving forward, right? So I shared last time about the debt service coming off. So we need to start now about capital projects in the future so that we don't have these big swings in our tax levy. We kind of try to keep things more predictable going forward. And then just in terms of reserves, right, like I'm aware of another district that hasn't gone to the tax cap every year, but they've got $20 million in reserves, right? That's a very different story than us, when, 4.7 million is dedicated for capital reserves and not for other things, not as liquid for that. So just some of those things to throw out there. But I do appreciate the feedback about videos we're working on getting out the information. And then on just general kind of announcements, this Thursday is a new candidate night. Our attorneys will be here to kind of share what it means to be a board candidate. Board members will be there as well, just kind of share their perspective and answer questions. I think that was a great night last year, looking for the same kind of back and forth. April 8th, we will present, our first round budget, which will, be the budget that is here as well. If the board would like to see reductions, obviously I'll build in some reductions as alternates as well. And then we can have that conversation on the 8th as to the board's willingness to use additional reserves this year as a good plan for this current school year for that. And then on the 22nd, we do not have school, but we will have a board meeting for the final budget as well. Other thing I did want to mention is that part of that money that he said was kind of over fund balance is the appropriated money to cover the expenses, that $77 million budget this year, right? We're not spending that $3 million, hopefully, right, fingers crossed right now, unless things happen. But, right, it's the $3 million number because we had the insurance holiday, which is a little over $1 million, right? So it's really $2 million if you think about it that way. And then just in general, right, he said you need cash flow, right? So we need cash flow, so you can't build a school budget down to the penny, right? And then also, even just in terms of salaries and positions, we need to build in extra funds in case a staff member goes out on a medical leave for the year. We'll still paying their salary, and then we have to pay a salary for a whole new person, right? So we were fortunate, in that area this year as well. The other side of that savings is we had some special ed students who were still waiting out of district placements, right? So there's a savings because unfortunately we haven't found a placement for them, but we did allocate money to cover their services when we do get a placement for them. So it's a variety of reasons. why that money will not be spent.
And just so everybody's following, because you pointed out to me during the meeting, you're talking about the line on page 3 that says RPT law allowance 4%.
Yeah.
That number, that's the 3 million.
No, so the amount over, right, so that 1.7, that was the amount that we would have pulled
Just so
from
everybody's
fund balance.
on the same page, right? So that's on page 3. It's that red 1.772. Yeah. Just a lot of numbers.
Yeah.
Just ask a point of clarification. Is it too late to have a capital project so there is no debt? I mean, there is no cliff?
So, as I shared last board meeting, we could, if we vote in December of '26, that would be good, because then we could use some debt service to make the bar drop a little bit lower, kind of keep things going, or we could go out to vote December 27 and start for a year or two. I am meeting with our financial planners, I think it's tomorrow or Wednesday, tomorrow morning, to talk about kind of timing for that and the actual amount that the project could be. With capital projects though, right, there are calculations based on that everything is aidable, right? So part of things may not be aidable depending on cost, right? So each building has a limit for site work as well as interior work, so we kind of have to maximize where we're going to spend money. But I would envision, right, the roadway at Riccardi being a big chunk of that project, at least the Riccardi aspect of it.
And like as he mentioned, and Tim had mentioned this last time, I think we were talking, we were in the exec session, we just mentioned it, that most districts do capital projects every 3 to 5 years. Yeah. Is there a way to start to plan that says, okay, this is the one we're going to do now, and then in 3 to 5 years, this is the next set? Like you can start to give the public an idea and get them used to the fact that, hey, most of these come every 3 to 5 years. Riccardi's going to be the big chunk of this. There's some other things off the building condition surveys. And then after that, folks, this is the next thing we're looking to go do.
Yeah, so that'll be part of the conversation tomorrow. It's really kind of looking at those time periods of when we can pick up extra stuff. The initial conversation is that the next one could be, right, well, our $4.7 million could equate to like $11 million tax-free. We can kind of just pay for it over time and get the return on the aid payments. And then by taking up that debt that comes off, it could be like another $7 million. Those are loose conversations, so I'll get better information tomorrow. So we could go out for, right, like roughly $18 million project next time, and then we can kind of, as that EPC comes off, can pick up a little bit extra for that and so forth. So more work to be done.
Just to be comprehensive, just go around the table. Anything else? Anybody?
I'll just say one more time, like, we need to be very out there, like, with this stuff, like, repetitive, too. Because, I mean, even with the meeting today, like, I think we only posted it once on Facebook, and there were some comments that I saw. I think we need to be, multiple times a week, just kind of putting it out there, just so it's there, more so than anything. I think the more it's there, the better off we are.
All right, if nothing else, motion to adjourn?
Second.
Ms. Kellner, seconded by Mr. Wells. All those in favor?